Hello everyone. Welcome to another part of What If Deku Ran an Orphanage. If you enjoy the story, please like, subscribe, and share the video. It really helps me out. I did not write the story. The original writer is Kyodon. Please go support them. Now let us dive in. The game room. You need to stop breaking these controllers. Kyoka told her vampiric opponent. It's not my fault these cursed controls cannot handle my might. Kiba shouted in frustration after breaking yet another controller. Don't you have a special controller that's super strong? Kyoka asked her skeptically. Why yes, but it's all the way upstairs, Kiba said, making a quick excuse. Queen of laziness. Kyoka said. Kiba was about to retort, but then Eri came running and hugged Kyoku. Clearly distressed. Yeri? Kyoku asked, quickly returning the hug in an attempt to comfort her sister. What's wrong? Eri looked at her with pleading puppy dog eyes that instantly made Kyoka melt from cuteness but also made her concerned. Can we go to your room? How could she ever say no? Kyoka's room. The two of them sat on Kyoka's bed, and after they got comfortable, Eri explained the situation. No. Kyoka hugged Eri protectively. You can't let them. They might try to use your blood as a weapon to hurt people. Eri's eyes widened. Like Overhaul? Kyoka nodded. Like Overhaul. But Izuka said they were going to help people. Eri pointed out. They probably lied to him. Kyoku accused. Daddy is too nice. They must have said he can help people to trick him into letting them have your blood. Kyoka loved her father. She loved him dearly. But she knew he could be too kind. He believed people too much. That's why she had to be vigilant and protect her family from liars. I'll go talk to Daddy. I have to warn him. Kyoka jumped off the bed and ran out the door, intent on finding Izuku. This left Eri with time to think about what Kyoka told her. She hadn't thought about it, but they might be lying to trick Izuka so they could use her blood as a weapon. Like Overhaul did. In all the cartoons and movies, they showed the government being bad people, so it made sense. But Izuka told her those things on TV were very different from real life, and Kyoka was often called paranoid by everyone else. Even if the government were completely trustworthy, Kyoka probably still wouldn't trust them. So maybe even though she really liked Kyoku, she wasn't the right person to ask. But then, who was? Maybe someone who had been with DOC. Fukanoko's room. Fukanoko was sewing up a hole that had been made in her skirt when there was a gentle knock on her door. Despite the gentleness of the knock, Fukanoko still flinched. Who's there? It's Eri, Eri answered. Can I come in? Please? Fuku debated internally. On one hand, she didn't want people in her room. On the other hand, it was Eri. Are you upset with me? Fuku asked. And no. You don't have to let me in. I don't want to bother you. Eri said sadly. Fuku was immediately stabbed with guilt and ran over to the door. No, you can come in. See, I'm opening the door right now. Fuku opened the door and was immediately met with a distressed Eri, causing her to panic even more. Oh no, I made her so upset. She probably won't want to be friends anymore. And oh my god, I wasn't thinking I let her into my room. Stupid Fuku, what did you do? Fuku berated herself. Fuku? Eri said, getting the attention of her zoned-out friend. Are you okay? Fuku snapped out of her thoughts and looked at Eri, trying to see if she was angry or upset with her, but she wasn't, at least not in any visible way. Normally that wouldn't get her to lower her guard, but she reminded herself that this was Eri. So she convinced herself to lower her guard just a little, tiny bit. Did you want something? Fuku asked. One explanation later. Oh, Eri, I don't know which one to pick. Fuku answered honestly. I wouldn't want anyone near my body like that, but those buildings that the government has, I don't want to go back to them. Eri frowned. Was it bad? They didn't hurt me, but I was lonely, Fuku admitted. No one visited me like you and Kay do. The only people that came were the men in suits, but they were like robots and I think they hated me. It was better than being with that bad man, but I like here a lot better. A lot better. Eri thought about that. She was glad that those people weren't being hurt, at least not physically, but she knew just as well as many of these kids did. Loneliness can hurt a lot. Flashes of her time with Overhaul popped up in her head. This time they weren't of her time in the chair. It was her time in her room. Just sitting there in deafening silence, completely and utterly miserable. And then she imagined someone else in that position. Someone who had done nothing wrong and whose only crime was being born with a bad quirk. It horrified her. Eri? Fuku gave Eri a concerned look as her friends started to panic. Eri, what's wrong? Eri snapped out of her thoughts and had noticed she was breathing a bit too much. After a few moments to calm herself, she responded, "And nothing. It doesn't look like nothing." Fuku pointed out, "Eri, I don't want those people to touch you. I am not sure you should say yes." Eri looked down. She wanted a more definite answer, because she herself was so unsure. Sensing this, Fuku suggested something. "Why don't you ask Kei? She might know." Kei, Eri thought. Kei was one of Eri's closest friends, the second child Izuku adopted, and her first sister. Maybe she had the answers that Eri didn't. The library. Kei was currently reading a book called Animorphs when Eri walked in. "Kei?" Eri called out to her sister. "Eri." Kei immediately put down her book and rapidly patted the seat next to her. "Come here. Come here." Eri did as instructed, walking over and climbing up on the seat next to the snake girl. Kei promptly wrapped Eri in a tight hug. "I missed you. Why, you saw me this morning," Eri quietly pointed out. "That's too lunning," Kei complained. Kei proceeded to cuddle Eri, and Eri found herself petting the snakes in her hair to calm herself. Eventually, Kei noticed that Eri was upset, however, and momentarily stopped the cuddling. "What's wrong?" Eri bit her lip and explained. Another explanation later. I would do it," Kei said after hearing her out. "You would?" Eri asked. "If people need help, then you should help them," Kei stated simply. "That's what Izuku thinks. And if he didn't think that, we would all still be sad and in danger." That statement crashed into Eri's mind as she realized just how true that statement was. Izuku had to make hard decisions a lot too. Izuku was probably super scared when she knocked on his door and asked him to help her hide from a criminal. But he did it, and with practically no hesitation. He was probably scared when that villain was robbing the supermarket using Kei, but he didn't run or hide, he saved her. Izuku always tried to help people even if he was scared, even if something bad might happen to him. And because of that, she was here. Because of that, they were all here. Because of that, they were a family. Eri felt like she wanted to do the same thing, that she should do the same thing. "But you don't have to if you don't want to," Kei said, tightening the hug once more. "I don't want to ever make you sad. Don't do something that will make you sad." Well, that was a conflicting statement. Did she want Eri to do it or not? Right now she was thinking that she should do it, but what Kyoka said earlier about them maybe using them as weapons and her own fear of having her blood taken were still making her indecisive. Maybe she should ask someone smart about this? Other than Izuku, he was busy, and she didn't want to bother him any more than she did, so who was the other smartest person here? Kitchen. Fu and Yami were busy munching down on meats when Eri came up to their table. "Fu?" Eri asked. Fu paused for a moment before finishing up the slab of meat as fast as he could. Once he was done, he turned to Eri. "Whacked? Huck. Ate." Fu shoved his hand down his throat in a way that looked extremely uncomfortable, and after a few moments, he grabbed the piece of meat that had gotten stuck in his throat before putting it back in his mouth, chewing and swallowing it properly. "Do you need something, Eri?" Fu asked. "Something's wrong," Yami said after eating his own slab of meat. "Lots of bad feelings." "Did those men do something?" "Lots of bad feelings everywhere after they left." Eri paused for a moment. She wasn't going to get Yami involved at first, but since he knew something was wrong, she might as well tell him too, if only to keep him from worrying. Yet another explanation later. Fu said. "That's hard." Yami nodded in agreement. "Yeah, hard. What should I do?" Eri asked. "Well, I don't think I can tell you what to do." Fu said. "I give blood all the time, but I don't feel pain or fear. So it's all different for me. It's probably different for everyone." Eri immediately looked disappointed. "You're the one making the choice," Fu said. "So which do you feel worse about? Not helping those people or getting your blood drained?" Eri thought about it. She hated both options. But which one did she hate the least? It was so hard. Both options caused her immense amounts of fear, stress, anger, and just every negative emotion known to man. She couldn't tell which one she hated more. Luckily, someone could. "Think about first option," Yami told her. "Huh?" Eri asked. "Think about first option," Yami repeated. "You mean not helping them?" Fu asked, receiving a nod from Yami. Eri didn't know where this was going, but she followed the instruction anyway, mostly because she was slightly scared of annoying Yami. She thought about all these people, stuck in a room, all alone, never going outside, never getting to do all the good things in the world, like go to an amusement park. And they would be like this forever. Many emotions flowed through her. Guilt and self-hatred at the thought of her own selfishness being in the way of these people's happiness, as well as fear and sadness at the thought that they would be stuck there forever. After a few seconds, Yami spoke again. Now think about the other one. You mean giving them her blood? Fu asked to clarify, receiving another nod. Eri thought about it. She thought of being in that chair again. Izuku reassured her it wouldn't be like with Overhaul, but all she could think of was that chair and the brief memory of Overhaul coming towards her. Before the memories ended because Kyoku erased them. She couldn't remember being taken apart, but she could remember the fear of it, the fear she had felt every day until Izuku saved her. The fear she felt now wasn't new, it was an old fear, one that was put aside but never away. An old fear that now exploded out and made her want to cower and hide. Second option. Give blood. Yami said. Huh? Eri was taken off guard by this sudden answer. The first one feels worse, Yami said. The second one isn't as bad. As Eri was looking at him in confusion, Fu figured out what Yami meant. Yami can see emotions, Fu explained. So he told you to think of both options to see which one made you feel worse. And apparently giving blood doesn't make you feel as bad. It doesn't? Eri asked, a little wide-eyed. First one feels worse, second one not as bad. To the second one, give blood? Yami said. That actually made Eri feel a little better. It made her choice, which had been tearing at her all day, a little easier. The only thing keeping her from helping those people were her own feelings. But if she was just going to feel worse if she didn't help them anyway, then the choice was obvious. However, making the choice easier didn't make it easy. Her fear was still gnawing at her and grabbing her as if it was trying to keep her in place. She wanted to go make the decision, she wanted to help. She knows she should help. And she knew that not helping wouldn't be good for her either. But even after all this time, fear was still trying to hold her back. You're a good person, Eri, Fu said, gaining everyone's attention. You want to help people so much that not helping people makes you feel worse than something you're afraid of. That means you're brave and selfless, just like Izuku. Like Izuku? Eri asked, small tears welling in her eyes. Fu nodded. You want to be a doctor, right? So those people are your first patients. I think you may be the youngest doctor ever. Eri stayed quiet, silently being reassured by Fu's words, which was exactly the boy's intention. Izuku told me and Kiba that to be heroes and to save people, we have to overcome our fears. And you're doing that right now. So you're like a hero doctor. Fu knew that Eri must be going through a lot with this choice, so he had to say everything he could to help her. A hero, doctor, Eri whispered. Yami looked at Eri as the immense feeling of negativity was somewhat mitigated by Fu's reassurance. It was still an overwhelming amount of negativity, but Fu seemed to be helping a tiny bit. Yeah, a hero doctor. You're really good, Yami said in an attempt to help. Eri seemed stuck there, unable to move as all sorts of emotions overwhelmed her. Fu hopped down from the chair and took Eri's hand. Why don't we tell Izuku about your decision? Eri gave a hesitant nod and Fu took her by the hand and guided her to Izuku's office. Izuku's office. Yes, and under no circumstances do I want them to weaponize this, Izuku said to his newly hired lawyers. And dash. Knock knock knock. Hold on a second please, Izuku said. Come in. Fu walked in with Eri in tow. Izuku? Eri has her answer. Really? Izuku hadn't expected it to come this fast. Although why is Fu with her? Did he see how panicked she was and try to help? Well, it's Fu, so I doubt he would try to pressure her into anything. That's more Kyoka's thing. Izuku sighed, remembering how long it took for him to convince Kyoku that he wasn't letting them do anything bad to Eri. Because you better believe he had plans to stop and scheming the government may be doing. Not that it would matter if Eri said no. Fu brought Eri over to Izuku's desk and then stood behind her. Go on, you can do it. Eri looked at Izuku, fear and hesitation still very clear on her face, and if Izuku looked close enough he could see that she was slightly trembling. Will they use my blood tea to hurt people? Eri asked. Before she could say yes, she had to know the answer to this. Izuku rubbed her head reassuringly. I would never let them do that. Ever. The definitiveness in Izuku's voice helped Eri make her choice. Then I want to help. Eri managed to say, her trembling increasing, and she shut her eyes as tears started coming down her cheeks. Please let me help. Not even a second later, Izuku was embracing her. My brave little girl. I'm so proud of you. Eri took in the praise, letting it comfort her as the finality of her choice set in, and images of the chair pledged her mind. It's okay. Everything's going to be okay. Izuku reassured her. Fu joined in muttering comforting words, and the trio stayed like this for a long time until Eri eventually ran out of energy. I'm tired. Eri sniffled. That's okay, Eri, you just go rest, Izuku told her. Fu, bring her to her room. And make sure she's not alone. Fu nodded, lifting up Eri and walking out of his office. Once they left, Izuku sat back in his chair and leaned back, releasing a breath he had been holding. It had been an emotional moment for him too, and many of those emotions lingered inside of him. Fear, worry, sadness, self-hate, and pride. Pride in his daughter's selflessness. Izuku saw his phone and immediately remembered what he had been doing beforehand and picked it up as fast as he could. I'm so sorry that took so long. Izuku apologized. Let's get back to discussing the contract. 2 days later, the men from DC once again walked into his office with the lead man taking a seat in front of Izuku. You said you had an answer? The man asked. Yes, we will be handing over the blood, Izuku said, much to the men's elation. However, I have many stipulations. Izuku pulled out a thick contract from a drawer in his desk and laid on the table in front of them. These are my terms, there will be no exceptions. Read them and either you agree to them or you don't get the blood. Izuku said firmly, making the men nervous. The lead agent spent half an hour reading the contract and learned just how right he was to be nervous. In short, the terms were as such. Under no circumstance could the formula be used outside the purpose of getting rid of the quirks of level 2 OPCs. And they could not be weaponized at all. The requirements of using the formula is as such. They must have the approval of all legal guardians and the person themselves. The person must be at least 10 years old and be made fully aware of the consequences and after effects of this decision. Then they must submit a form to Izuku or a person of Izuku's choosing that he or a person of his choosing must approve. Any and all things involving Eri's blood Izuku should be made aware of, and he had the right to check on any and all things involving her blood. DC would not be directly involved with the extraction of or handling of blood, and that duty would instead fall to another branch of the government. Basically, this would give Izuku full control over everything that happened involving this project. We can't accept this. The man said. Well, then you're not getting her blood. Izuku knew exactly what position he was in. Eri's blood was an irreplaceable ingredient for the quirk erasing formula, and he had a full monopoly over it. Those kids that DUC holding would cost them absurd amounts of money to contain for the rest of their lives, and so if they could just get rid of their quirks, then they'd stand to save a crap ton of money. But to do that, they needed Eri. Izuku had all the power here, so he could afford to make unreasonable demands. So long as the government stood to gain all that money from it, they'd be stupid to refuse. That, and also I wonder how the public would feel about you refusing my terms though, Izuku said out loud, causing the men to panic. Because honestly, the reason you wouldn't be able to agree with them is if you had some kind of ulterior motive. And I wonder how the people would react to that ulterior motive getting in the way of helping people in need. Izuku had not signed any non-disclosure agreements, meaning at any point in time he could talk about everything that was going on here, and if something happened that he didn't like, it wouldn't be too hard to bring the hammer of bad public opinion down on the government for this. The man grit his teeth and looked over the contract again before looking back at Izuku. Let us talk to our superiors. Izuku nodded and the men walked out of the room and pulled out their phones. He waited and waited and waited for a while more, and after a lengthy amount of time, they came back in. Maybe we can negotiate these terms. The lead agent said. Perhaps some compensation can be given. I don't want any money. Izuku interrupted him. I will say this one last time. If I have to say it again, then we're finished here. These are my terms. Either sign the contract or leave. The man paused before saying, I need to talk with my superiors again. Tell your superiors that I don't have all day, Izuku said impatiently. The three men left the room once more, and Izuku took that moment to lean back in his chair and relax for a moment. It was exhausting to act so aggressive and rude. It just wasn't in his nature. But he needed to act like this. He had to remember that he had the power here and use that power to pressure them. Otherwise, there would be dire consequences. He looked at a picture of himself and Eri making apple pie. He had to remember why he did this, who he was doing this for. Even if it doubled his workload, it would be worth it. When he heard the door open, he immediately straightened up and the men walked back in with resigned looks on their faces. We'll need some time to spread this around and get all the proper signatures, but we plan on agreeing to your terms," the main agent said. Izuku smiled but did his best to hide his relief and excitement. "That's great. I'll let you take this copy of the contract so you can make copies and you can contact me when everything is signed." "Of course." The man all but sighed. As the men took the contract and left, Izuku silently celebrated his success in his office. "I need some tea," he thought. A week later, Eri sat anxiously in her bed. Today was the date of the blood donation. Izuku decided it should be as soon as possible so Eri didn't have to suffer the suspense forever. There were some doctors there with some machines and a mask connected to a tube that they would use to put her to sleep. Izuku was also present, kneeling down next to Eri and holding her hand to comfort her. "It's okay, everything's going to be okay. I'm so proud of you, you're so brave. You're going to help so many people. All right, now we just need her to lay down and we can start," said one of the doctors. Izuku gave her the most reassuring smile he could muster. "Just lie down, Eri. When you wake up, it will all be over." "Okay," Eri muttered quietly. She laid down and the doctors descended upon her. As fear grew inside her, she comforted herself by squeezing Izuku's hands tighter. As the mask came down on her face, she quickly went to sleep. The last words she heard were, "One day you'll do this without any fear at all." And then everything went black. When Eri opened her eyes, she was back in the chair. The same chair Overhaul had put her in so many times before. In the exact same Yakuza base she hoped to never see again. Panic and fear flooded her body as her brain immediately told her to run. But she couldn't move. No matter how much she tried, her body wouldn't budge. Then she heard footsteps. Footsteps coming from outside the room, walking towards her. Fear grew in her as the footsteps grew closer and tears started to drip from her eyes each second her body refused to move. Then the door opened. But who walked in wasn't Overhaul, it was her? It was Eri, just as she had been before Izuku found her. In that plain dress with her old bandages. The doppelganger walked closer to her, staring at her intently. "Why are we here again?" asked the doppelganger. Eri didn't answer, she was too confused, too scared. "Why did you let them hurt us again?" the doppelganger asked. Eri felt like she wanted to answer. She wanted to say that they weren't going to hurt her. That she would be fine. But the words died in her throat. However, the doppelganger seemed to read Eri's mind. And knew what she wanted to say. "They're taking your blood, Eri. They're doing what Overhaul did. They're gonna take you apart again." "And no." Eri spoke for the first time. "No, they won't." Eri suddenly blinked and the doppelganger transformed. She now had on Overhaul's mask and jacket. "Why do you think you can help people?" As the doppelganger spoke, Eri could hear Overhaul's voice speak with her as if she and Overhaul were speaking at the same time. "You know your quirk is a curse." "No, it's not," Eri denied. Izuku said dash. "Izuku's not here, you weak, pathetic girl." The doppelganger started to turn more monstrous. The bandages flew off, revealing scars and cuts underneath, all bleeding out on the floor. And bird-like feathers started to grow on her until she was nothing but a freak abomination of herself and Overhaul combined. "But I'm here. I'm always here. You can't escape me, Eri. You're mine. Always mine. Forever." Eri screamed as the nightmare opened its huge bird beak and swallowed her whole. Now Eri was floating in darkness. Alone and scared. She couldn't see a thing. "Izuku! Izuku!" Eri called out into the darkness. "Why can't you do anything on your own?" Suddenly the bird monster appeared in front of her, its beak and eyes popping out of the darkness, still using her and Overhaul's voice. "You worthless girl. Why can't you help yourself?" Eri started sobbing as the nightmare kept berating her. "Please. Help," she cried. And then there was a light. A light pierced through the darkness and a figure reached out of the light and grabbed onto Eri. "Shush, it's okay. It can't hurt you anymore." The light died down a bit and the figure was revealed to be what looked like an older-looking Eri. She was wearing stereotypical doctor attire, but the oddest part was that her hair and eyes were green and she was still faintly glowing. "You don't have to be afraid of them," she said. Her voice, much like the nightmare's, was a combination of her own voice and someone else's, in this case, that being Izuku's. The dream Eri took Eri into her embrace and Eri clung to the strange vision of her future self. She could feel her hand, it was warm, like Izuku's. "You can't be saved, Eri. You're mine." The nightmare repeated words overhaul had more or less said to her over and over, its darkness surrounding the two of them, enriching upon them. The dream Eri glared at the nightmare, and as the darkness threatened to engulf them, the dream Eri's glow brightened and destroyed the darkness. Ah! The nightmare screamed in pain. You're a liar. You've always been a liar. The dream Eri said. Your lies and mean words can't hurt anyone anymore. Eri's too strong. She's a strong, brave girl now. The dream Eri looked down at regular Eri. Eri, it's time to get rid of them now. Suddenly, the dream Eri's light started to spread onto Eri until she was now glowing with light. No. No. The nightmare sent out more darkness to attack the two of them. The dream gave Eri a gentle smile that reminded her of Izuku. Hold out your hand, Eri. They're waiting for you. Eri looked at the darkness and then at the dream before hesitantly she and the dream held out their hands to stop the darkness. And then all she saw was light. Back in the real world. Eri opened her eyes and was met with several blurry figures as her eyes tried to adjust to the light. I think she's waking up, shouted a loud female voice. Don't be too loud, scolded another feminine voice. Is she okay? Said a male voice that was further away. When Eri's eyes refocused, she saw that she was surrounded by her siblings and Izuku. Almost everyone was here, most of her siblings and Izuku were right up next to her bed. Otoko kept a good distance being in the back of the room and Kai was outside the window. The only one who wasn't here was Fukunoko, which made sense considering she couldn't bear to be around one other person, let alone 11. Eri was about to ask what everyone was doing here when she felt a small pain in her arm. She quickly looked at her arm and saw that there was a bandage on her arm. It's over, Eri, Izuku told her. It's done. They took the blood. Eri's eyes widened in disbelief. That was it? That was all? She went to sleep and woke up and the worst thing she had to endure was a slight soreness? Izuku had told her as much so she shouldn't be surprised, but this was nothing. She felt more pain than this when she stubbed her toe. Overhaul's blood-taking was 1,000 times worse. If it was this easy, then did he just hurt her because he hated her that much? Given what she knew of Overhaul, she figured the answer to that was yes. At last you have awoken. We were quite worried about you. Caretaker said that he didn't want you alone when you woke up. So we all arrived here to greet you. Kiba said. Are you okay, Eri? Kei asked, engulfing her in a hug. Hey, I want to hug her too. Kyoka said, going up and hugging Eri as well. Don't think you can get ahead of me? Kiba said, crawling over her siblings to hug Eri. Hey, don't overwhelm her. Izuka said, but with no effect. As Eri was being swarmed by her siblings, she felt as if any other time she would have been overwhelmed. But now, after the donation, she was just glad she didn't wake up alone again. Happy tears streamed down her cheeks as she realized that things were well and truly different. Meanwhile, Yami watched Eri closely, as for once the positive emotions overwhelmed the negative ones. He knew he did his job well. Later that night, given that Eri had slept for a good portion of the day, Izuku let her stay up later than normal. She had been spending that time watching TV when suddenly she got a knock on the door. Eri paused what she was watching and walked to the door. When she opened it, to her surprise, there was an entire tray of fresh chocolate chip cookies just sitting there, with a note next to it. She looked around for anyone who could have left it and saw that Fukunoko was looking at her from behind one of the corners, only to flee when she realized she'd been spotted. She left her room. Eri thought in surprise. Once she got over the fact that the famed recluse left her room for once, she looked down at the cookies and the note. In the note, written in very neat handwriting, was as such. I'm sorry I didn't come with everyone. I promise I care about you. I was just scared. Take the cookies. Please keep being my friend. Eri looked at the note and then at the cookies. Slowly, she took one of the cookies and bit into it. It's good, Eri thought. Eri looked at the rest of the cookies. Part of her wanted to finish the rest of them off, but she had a better idea. At Fukunoko's room, Fuku was sitting in her room, hoping beyond hope that Eri accepted the cookies and would still be friends with her. Oh my god, what if she hates the cookies? Stupid Fuku, you should have thought of something better. Fuku berated herself. Knock knock. EAP. Fuku jumped. Fuku? Can I come in? Eri asked. Please? Are you mad? Fuku asked. No. I'm happy, Eri said. Why you are? Fuku asked. Yes, Eri said. Fuku hesitated for a bit before ultimately deciding to open the door. On the other side was Eri with the plate of cookies. I wanted to share, Eri said. A share? Fuku repeated in shock. Eri nodded. The cookies are good, but food is better when you eat with someone else. And me? Fuku said as there was anyone else here. You want to eat with me? Eri nodded again. You're my friend. And just like that, the two of them spent the rest of the night, staying up way past their bedtimes, eating sugar and watching TV together. Neither of them could have asked for more. Not with a 10-foot pole. Kaizo Makaguro, aka Stain the Hero Killer, had a problem. And that problem's name was Kiba Midoriya. The kid was an up-and-coming internet star, gaining a surprising amount of followers for her age, mostly due to her personality, cute factor, and power. Normally Stain wouldn't have cared in the slightest. However, the problem was that she wanted to be a hero. And she wanted to be a hero to expand her followers to one day take over the world. So naturally, Stain, who wanted heroes to only have pure motives, had an issue with this. Now some would say that she's just a silly child and that she would grow up and see how ridiculous this was. Stain would argue otherwise. People with powerful quirks, which Kiba most certainly had, tended to be arrogant whether they be a hero or a villain. And the girl was clearly a rich, spoiled girl, meaning she was definitely gonna keep that arrogance as she grew up. All in all, the girl would most likely grow up to be another fame-obsessed, superficial, fake hero. Which is why Stain wanted to beat the shit out of her. Not kill her, she was very young. Meaning she could perhaps be educated instead of slaughtered. Stain wanted to sneak into that overly large house of hers and stab her a few times, break a few bones, leave some permanent scarring, and then leave. Normally this wouldn't be a problem. It should be easy to beat up a child. But Kiba Midoriya was no average child. Calling this child strong would be like saying the sun was a bit bright. She was ridiculously strong, able to fight giant kaiju at full power, could run a mile faster than he could run 10 feet, and could survive falling from skyscraper-level heights. In other words, in terms of fighting, she was out of his league. Sure, he was way more experienced and skilled, but that didn't matter much when power difference was so apparent that he wouldn't even be to physically harm her, and one hit would be enough to crush his skull in. But that wasn't the real problem. If it was just Kiba by herself, he could beat her. Not at full power, but she wasn't always at full power. Her power relied on how much blood she'd consumed, meaning that there must be a time she would be weak enough for him to beat her. But it didn't matter much because it wasn't just Kiba. Her whole family was a problem. Firstly, if he wanted to beat Kiba, then he'd need to do it when she was low on blood. However, she seemed to almost constantly be followed by her brother Fu, an infinite supply of blood. Secondly, there were the two other siblings she'd shown off, Shiruku and Kai, both of whom he wasn't exactly sure he could beat at all. With both of them being similar in power to Kiba but seemingly not sharing her weakness. And thirdly was the sister Sansen Midoriya, who he definitely could not beat. She seemed to either be made of goo or acid, didn't matter, either way he couldn't hurt her and she could hurt him. Now, Stain had wondered why the hell there were so many kids with grossly overpowered quirks in one place. And after a bit of digging, he figured out why. Because they were part of a program that collected overpowered children and kept them in one place. Meaning not only would he have to deal with the children he already knew about, but also all the children he didn't know about would also be grossly overpowered and dangerous. Oh, and he'd also have to deal with whatever security there would be for the house as well. Even if he had a death wish that big, he wouldn't choose to die at the hands of 7-year-olds. The only person who I will allow to defeat me is All Might himself. Stain thought. So no, as much as it pained him to see someone like Kiba Midoriya continue to arrogantly state she wanted to be a hero for such self-centered reasons, he wouldn't do anything about it. Because he couldn't. He could, in theory, just stalk her until she was weak enough and far away from everyone else for him to attack her. However, it seems she rarely ever left her house and never left without one of her siblings, it seems. Of course, there would have to be exceptions. At some point she would leave the house alone, but the amount of time Stain would have to dedicate to find that specific moment just wouldn't be worth it. He could spend that time killing actual pro heroes. For now, the girl was safe from his wrath. For now. Security. Izuku was doing more paperwork in his office when Yami came in on a Beowulf. Oh, hi Yami. Is something wrong? Izuku asked him. Lots of energy, Yami told him. It took a second for Izuku to figure out what he meant. You mean you have lots of negative energy to make grim? Yami nodded. Want to be useful? Oh. Izuku smiled at him. Thank you, Yami, but it's your quirk, are you sure? Don't you want to use it for yourself? No, Yami said bluntly. No need. Huh. Well, I guess he barely does anything except sleep and eats. Izuku thought. But still, what could I use the Grim for? Well, what is the limit of what Yami can create? Maybe I can help him explore that. He would probably use the Grim as security. The griffin that had washed Kai were used to patrol the skies around the house. Make sure that nothing could come out of the air and pluck someone away again. We should see what kind of Grim you can create, Izuku told him. Let me finish up some more work and then we can go to the library and then the training room. Yami nodded and laid down on his Beowulf to wait. Half an hour later in the training room, the two of them arrived in the indestructible room with the Beowulf carrying a load of books. Kay had also joined them at Izuku's insistence, having met up with them in the library. Why books? Yami asked, wondering why Izuku had wanted them to bring a crap load of books with them. Well, I want to see what kind of creatures you can create, Izuku explained. You created a lot of Grim just based on animals you saw, but you also created a griffin. I guess Kiba suggested that, so that means you're not limited to things that exist in the real world. Griffins aren't real? Yami asked, somewhat shocked. They aren't? Kay asked, looking a bit dejected at that. No, sorry, Izuku said, much to Kay's disappointment. But that means that with enough energy, Yami could create pretty much anything. Yami looked only slightly amazed by that idea, which still caused him to show more expression on his face than he did normally. Oh, can you create a snake? A big snake? With 2 heads? Kay asked as her imagination started to go wild. As Izuku intended. Okay, maybe we can talk about what it will look like and dash. Before Izuku could finish, Yami had already started creating the Grim, barfing up the black goop on the floor. Oh. From the black goo rose a black snakehead, twice the size of Izuku's own head, showing that once again this Grim was big. The snake Grim slithered out of the pool, showing that it was in fact huge, and when it finally finished emerging, instead of a tail on the end, it was a white snakehead. The snake was big, roughly around 8 feet in length and 2.5 feet in width. Half of its body was black with a few white patterns and the other half was white with some black patterns. Ah, it's perfect. Kay practically had stars in her eyes and she ran up to the snake and hugged it with her might, her snakes hissing happily and rubbing against the Grim. Interesting, these patterns are too elaborate for Yami to come up with. Come to think of it, most of the Grim are too elaborately designed. I wonder why they look like this. Izuku pondered before realizing something important. Wait, what am I gonna do with this thing? It's not like the snake was too big for the house. But a giant snake roaming the house wouldn't exactly make the shy kids or the new kids feel at home. Maybe I could use it in the vents? Make sure that no one can sneak in through them? I guess that could work. Izuku watched Kay snuggle up to the snake, a huge smile plastered on her face. Maybe let Kay have one too. See if we can make it smaller. Suddenly the door opened and a very pouty Kiba ran in with a book in her arms. I heard you were creating new Grim. And you didn't invite me. Kiba sounded more than a little offended. Oh, sorry Kiba, I thought you were busy streaming? Izuku asked her. I was, but I could have stopped. Kiba crossed her arms and pouted, holding the book to her chest. Kiba's displeasure dissipated almost immediately when she saw the snake and was replaced with excitement. Ah, of course, Kay would suggest a snake. And what a wonderful snake it is. A truly impressive monster. What shall we name this creation? That's right, it needs a name. Kay agreed. The children racked their heads trying to come up with a name. Izuku was the first one to speak. How about Taijutsu? Taijutsu? Kiba repeated. Why you know, like the symbol. The circle that has black and white on it. Let me show you. Izuku pulled up a picture of it on his phone. The symbol. Oh, I've seen that. Kiba pointed at it excitedly. Still, it needs something more. Ah, King Taijutsu. That's perfect. Hello, King Taijutsu. Kay shouted as she hugged the big snake. Sure. Sounds cool. Yami was, as usual, neutral to the names given to his Grim, but he wasn't against it and it made them happy, so he rolled with it. Alright, let's make another one. Kiba opened the book she was holding, showing them a picture of a manticore. This is a manticore. It has the body of a lion, a scorpion tail, and bird wings, and it breathes fire. This may have been a mistake. Izuku thought. I'm okay. What do you mean 5? Izuku almost shouted into the phone. Well, here is the thing. You want all these kids out of the facility. We want all these kids out of the facility. So we're just gonna increase the number of kids we give you until you otherwise. Nami told him. Of course you could just ask us to lower the amount. Of course, that will mean some of the kids will have to stay here longer, but if it helps you get a little more rest time, I guess it's worth it. Not worth it to those kids, but worth it to you, I dash. Stop. Izuku snapped. Izuku was so tired of her blatantly trying to manipulate him and so tired of it working. That combined with how tired he was feeling in general, he just snapped. Immediately after his small anger spike, he was filled with remorse. Maybe we should stay at 3 for now, Nami said, taken off guard by Izuku's uncharacteristic outburst. Yeah. He didn't want to leave those kids in the facilities longer than he had to, but after that outburst, he figured he should slow down, otherwise he might snap at the children, which is the last thing he wanted to do. Great. We should have them to you in 2 days. I'll send the information about the kids via email. Nami said. And maybe hire some people. You sound stressed. I know, Izuku muttered, taking a long sip of his tea. I am sorry for my outburst. Please forgive me. It's fine, man. Just maybe see a therapist. Lord knows you need one. Nami said. Anyway, Nami out. She hung up, leaving Izuku alone in his office to prepare. He decided to spend the next few minutes between now and when the info on the new kids would be sent, relaxing in his chair with his tea. The warmth of the calming tea soothed him slightly as he leaned back and closed his eyes. However, panic suddenly overwhelmed him as he very nearly fell asleep. Can't sleep yet, still have work to do. Izuku reminded himself. Izuku moved his calming tea away from him and instead took a cup of coffee he kept on hand. As he was drinking his cup of wake-up juice, there was a knock on his door. Can I come in? It was Yami. Yes, of course, Izuku told him after gulping down his drink. Yami walked in, and if one looked closely, they could see that his expression was a bit more concerned than usual. Something bad happened? Yami asked. And no. Izuku denied. Nothing's wrong, why would you ask? Bad feelings exploded. Yami tried to explain as best he could. As usual, it took Izuku a second to figure what Yami was saying. His inexperience speaking combined with his unique way of seeing the world made it hard to figure out what he was saying at times. Eventually, Izuku figured it out. He must have sensed when I snapped at Nami. I got upset for a moment. But it's fine. Izuku lied. Yami scowled at him. Liar. Huh? Izuku was taken aback. Yami had always been so passive and cooperative since he got here. This was the first time he's shown any hint of disapproval towards Izuku. You're getting worse, Yami told him. More bad feelings every day. Not anger, lot of fear, lot of sadness, lots of other things. You are not okay. Izuku was really caught off guard. Although in hindsight it should have been obvious. Yami could literally see emotions, so of course he would notice if he'd been stressed out, although he didn't seem to be able to identify stress, just seeing it as another bad emotion, most likely due to lack of experience. Still, he would have to explain this away somehow. Preferably in a way that didn't make him worry. Listen, I just have a lot to do, so I've been stressed out recently. Izuku tried to explain. Stress? Yami repeated, wondering if that was that bad feeling he didn't recognize. Yes, stress, Izuku told him. Don't worry, I'm going to hire some new helpers soon and dash. Lair? Yami interrupted. I see you lying. Izuku's eyes widened. Wait, you can see lies? Yami nodded. You feel worse when you lie. Oh, that's actually really clever. But it means I can't lie to him. Izuku didn't particularly like lying to the children. But he would do so if he thought it was in their best interest, although he never felt good about it. You see. Izuku desperately searched for a way to keep him in the dark without lying to him. Meanwhile, Yami was getting frustrated. He had come here to see what was bothering his father and hopefully make him feel better, but that feeling, stress, was only increasing since he got here. What's wrong? Yami repeated aggressively. Aye. Izuku sighed. It doesn't matter how I'm doing. Or what's wrong. I'm just really stressed about my work. I'm trying to fix the problem, but it's taking a while and I'm having some issues. But it's nothing for you to be worried about. Yami growled. But dash. Yami! Izuku shouted, causing the boy to flinch. Having never heard Izuku shout before. Just, let it go, please. Yami looked up at his father. He really wanted to make those bad feelings go away. But he only seemed to be making things worse. For now, he would back down. But he'd try something else. Yami bowed his head. I'm sorry, Dad. No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have yelled at you like that. Izuku apologized. You were only trying to help. How about I make steak tonight? That should have excited him and it did make him feel a bit better, but he was still very upset over his failure to help Izuku and left without saying another word. Once he left, Izuku's head fell into his hands as shame and guilt ate away at him. I can't keep going like this. I've started yelling at the kids. I need to hire help. Suddenly, Izuku's phone vibrated. He took it out and saw a notification that he had gotten the files on the new kids. I'll look at workers after this, Izuku told himself. Hours later, it was late at night, and many of the kids had fallen asleep. However, as usual, the nightlife of this house was almost as active as the day. Kids like Sanson and Fu never needed to sleep, so they often stayed up all night. Kiba liked to go outside during the night as the sun would not be around to bother her. Fukinoko would like to sneak out of her room to do things around the house that she couldn't do in the day because of the number of people. Izuku was also often awake during the night doing work. Tonight, however, someone else was awake. That being Yami. Fu was in the library reading a book when Yami, riding on his Beowulf as usual, came up to him. Yami? Is something wrong? Fu asked him. You smart, Yami said. You mean you're smart? Fu corrected. No, you smart, Yami told him. No, I mean you said it wrong, Fu said. It's you're not you. Oh. Yami realized his mistake. You're smart. There you go. And yes, I am, Fu said. He was very aware of his own intelligence compared to everyone else, thanks to the emotional distance his quirk gave him, one of few benefits it afforded him. Problem? Dad has lots of bad emotions. Yami tried to explain. Tried to help. Made it worse. Fu nodded. How bad is it? Bad, Yami said. No, I mean, is it worse than Fukinoko? Fu asked. Almost, Yami said. Fu frowned. I knew Izuku wasn't feeling good, but if it's that bad. The undead miner thought about the situation. Confronting him, according to Yami, only made the situation worse. Fu was smart enough to realize when he needed help. We should ask Achiko for help next time she's here, Fu said. Right now we should just try not to make things harder for him. For whatever reason, the two boys had a bad feeling about this. Like whatever they had just stumbled on was the tip of the iceberg. They would just have to wait and see how this all played out. Izuku was glad that, at the very least, 2 of the 3 new children would not require any special precautions. Mu was an interesting one. His quirk let him phase into a different dimension. Now it wasn't like he went to a different universe or something. Reportedly, it's more like he went to a different plane of existence where he could still see everything around him, but they can't see or interact with him, and he can't interact with them. In fact, he could reportedly go through objects while in this dimension and even walls. One big drawback, however, is that wherever or whatever this dimension is, it doesn't seem like things are really supposed to exist in it. And as such, if Mu stays in that dimension for any time after 30 minutes, his body starts to break down and disintegrates. Then it takes about an hour before he can safely re-enter his dimension. He can also drag other things and even people into this dimension, however, they break down much faster, typically after about a minute. Also, according to the reports, the boy was rather shy and liked to be in his dimension for long periods of time. Often he wouldn't realize when he should leave his dimension until he had already started disintegrating, leading to various health issues. So in other words, Izuku now had a ghost child whom he could not see or touch and could walk through walls, as well as being able to destroy basically anything he could physically drag into his dimension. Oh, and he also had to somehow make sure he didn't accidentally kill himself by overusing his quirk. What fun! Yanda, on the other hand, had a quirk that didn't pose a physical threat, rather it was a threat to people's privacy. Her quirk was a rare quirk that gave her a disability, making her completely deaf and mute. Instead of hearing words, she could hear people's thoughts, as if they were speaking them out loud. And instead of speaking, she could communicate telepathically. Interestingly enough, her telepathy worked more like talking but in people's minds. The range of her ability only extended to hearing range, however it was unaffected by walls and other obstacles. Hopefully he could keep from thinking anything worrying or complicated around her. Although that would be difficult. He'd also told all the kids about this, of course, so that way they would at least know what was happening. The last child did require a custom room. Little Netsu had a fire quirk. A really powerful fire quirk. One that he would have a rather hard time turning off. As a result, the boy was always on fire. meaning not only would he require a special room, but he would also need special clothes as well as gloves and shoes, and he would need way more fire extinguishers around the house, and he would need to teach the kids how to use fire extinguishers. They had a sprinkler system, but he didn't want to take chances. Well, on the bright side, he wouldn't really need to wash his clothes, considering any filth would almost certainly get incinerated by the constant fire. Not that his job of washing everyone's clothes would get any easier. Izuku sighed as he waited outside the house for the new arrivals. He had stopped trying to get the children altogether for the new arrivals, as that was a fool's errand at this point. They would eventually meet up with each other, hopefully. Fukunoko still hasn't met half the house's residents. He was brought out of his thoughts by the sounds of cars pulling up around the tree. Eventually, the car stopped and then someone stepped out. It was Nami. Oh no. Izuku's shoulders slumped. Seeing Nami was never a good sign. And what's worse is that she was holding a weird metal canister, which gave Izuku all sorts of bad feelings. Aizu. My dude. Nami said casually, walking up to him like her existence wasn't a blight on his sanity. How are you? Are you getting some help? Like, mentally and physically? I'm looking into it, Izuku said, his tone completely devoid of energy. Not to be rude, but why are you here? And what's in that canister? Don't worry about that. Nami waved her hand dismissively in an exaggerated fashion. Let's get these kids inside and then we can have a little chat. Izuku looked towards the car and saw two men walking towards him, carrying an unconscious boy in their arms. He was about 7 and pretty small for his age. His entire body, as well as his hair, was bone white, really giving off a ghostly vibe. This was presumably Mu. They dumped the boy in his arms, and Izuku noted how incredibly light he was. We sedated him so that way he didn't use his quirk while we were transporting him, Nami explained. I hope this doesn't become a pattern. Izuku sighed, remembering how Fukunoko also came here unconscious. Hello, father, said a feminine voice in his head. Izuku panicked for a moment before realizing who this was. Oh, you must be Yanda. Nice to meet you. A pleasure, Yanda said, stepping out of the car to reveal herself to him. The girl was about 9 years old, with curly pink hair that had some purple strands in it, and her eyes were also a strange shade of pink. Adorable as expected, was Izuku's reactionary thought. They all are. Thank you, came the girl's cheery thought as she smiled brightly. Izuku noticed that despite no words coming out, her mouth still moved when she used her telepathy. Oh, right, she can hear me, Izuku thought as he realized just how hard it was gonna be to control his thoughts. Thank goodness I don't curse even in my head. I already know a lot of bad words, Yanda thought sadly. Oh, Izuku slumped. Then from the last car came an agent who was sweating profusely, panting for air as she looked like she had been in the sauna for too long. Why didn't I get protective equipment? Asked the woman. We're here. Get out, please. The back door opened and then, whoosh. A fireball burst from the car and went up 6 feet in the air, burning so bright they all had to look away for a moment. Behold, I have arrived, shouted a small boy's voice. When the light died down, they could see a small boy about 7 years old, his body a burning red inferno with flames crackling off of him, contained by fireproof clothing, floating 6 feet in the air. Netsu. Oh, I have a bad feeling about this, Izuku thought, not seeing Yanda nod after hearing his thoughts. Netsu looked down at Izuku and they could make out a smirk behind his flames. So you're my new father. Well, congratulations. You just hit the jackpot. The great Netsu has appeared, soon to be the world's greatest hero. He and Kiba are going to fight. A lot, Izuku realized. Who is Kiba? Yanda asked. Oh, she's another one of the kids, trust me. You'll know who she is soon, Izuku responded before turning his attention to Netsu and putting on an uneasy smile. Well, could you come down so we can go inside and I can show you your room? Yeah, just. Netsu stopped talking and started focusing. His body started going down a few centimeters only to float back up. He can't get down, can he? Yanda asked. Maybe. Izuku watched for a few more moments, however, the boy simply could not get down. No, I don't think he can. Idiot. Yanda thought, however, she didn't use her telepathy so Izuku didn't hear that one. Do you need some help? Izuku asked him. And no. I got it. Netsu kept trying, but after a few moments, he slumped over dejectedly. Please get me down. Izuku nodded and started looking around in his pocket before finding what he was looking for. A white, bone-like whistle. Wee-wee. From the top of the house, a grim griffin heard the whistle and flew down, eventually landing in front of Izuku. Freaking out Yonda. What is that? The small girl immediately ran behind Izuku, hiding behind his leg. Cool. Netsu said with eyes wide in awe. This is a grim. One of the other kids here makes these to guard the house and help the others. Izuku explained, going up to the creatures. So even if they look scary, don't be afraid of them. Izuku made sure to think about everything he was saying word for word so that way Yonda could hear what he was saying. Yonda still looked at the beast skeptically, still unnerved by the monster made of darkness. Please help him down, gently, Izuku ordered the grim. The griffin flew up and grabbed the boy's leg with his claw. Fortunately, it grabbed his pants so the fire didn't spread to it as well. He pulled the boy down to the floor before promptly letting him go. Ah yeah? Thanks, demon bird. Netsu said with a big grin on his face. All right, go back to the roof with the others, Izuku ordered as the griffin followed his orders and flew away. Others? There are more of those things? Yonda asked. Yeah, but they're not all over the place. I try to keep them out of sight most of the time because they are a bit scary. Izuku thought. A bit? Yonda thought. Can I have one of those? Netsu ran up to Izuku and asked with eyes wide in excitement. Well, all the kids can ask the Grim for help, Izuku explained. He did ask Yami to give the kids control of the Grim as well, albeit limited control. He didn't want Kiba to order the Manticore to start shooting fire and end up setting the house ablaze. Although with Netsu that was now going to be a constant concern. But if you're good you could have one for a pet. Yes. My new dad is awesome. Netsu cheered. Izuku felt a spark of happiness in his chest from that statement and a small smile appeared on his face. Seeing this, Yonda scowled for a second before hugging Izuku's arm. I think you're great too, Dad. Oh, thank you. Izuku told her mentally. Wow. The kids sure do behave well. Then again, none of them ever really behaved badly. I mean, Yami kidnapped me, but he didn't know any better. What? Yonda's eyes went wide with shock after hearing that. Oh, right, she can still hear me. Izuku realized. Don't worry about that. I'm fine. He's fine. He didn't know any better at the time. He won't do anything like that again. Okay. Yonda didn't seem fully convinced. Hopefully meeting him will help get rid of some of her fears. Izuku thought before realizing once again she could still hear him. I'm just gonna have to get used to this, aren't I? Hey, what's that voice I'm hearing in my head? Netsu asked. Hello? Voice? Who are you? That's me. Yonda said, raising her hand. It's my quirk. I can hear your thoughts too. Wow. Okay, what number am I thinking of? Netsu asked. You're not thinking of a number. You're thinking you're so smart by not thinking of a number. Yonda couldn't help but roll her eyes. Whoa. Netsu said. Your quirk is cool. Not as cool as mine, but cool. I'm deaf. Yonda explained bluntly. Oh, what does that mean? Netsu tilted his head in confusion. It means I can't hear anything. I can hear thoughts, but not anything else. Yonda asked. So I can't hear when you talk. Oh. Netsu thought. Okay. Your quirk is cool. Not as cool as mine, but cool. Thanks. Yonda thought. Well, now that everyone is introduced, let's go inside. Nami grinned. The sooner you two get to your rooms, the sooner me and Daddy Dearest get to talk. Please don't call me that. Izuku sighed, pulling out a thermos and drinking coffee. So tired. Need to keep going. Are you tired, father? Yonda asked, concerned for her new father's safety. Izuku flinched. I'm fine. I'm fine. Let's go to your rooms. Sometime later. Izuku and Nami sat in his office with Nami still holding the canister and Fu having joined them at Nami's request. The new children had been shown to their rooms and Izuku had excused himself. Yonda had tried to stick around, but Izuku insisted that they would get to know each other better after this meeting. Again, not to be rude, but why are you here and why did you ask that Fu join us? Izuku asked. Fu was sitting behind him, staying silent and listening intently. Well, remember when I said we were only gonna bring 3? Nami asked. Izuku's eyes widened as he realized what exactly was in that canister. Before you say anything, Nami said quickly. It's a baby. We brought them into our custody and we needed to get them out of there immediately. For their safety. Izuku sighed. Well, if it's for their safety then it can't be helped. Please explain more about the child and what this has to do with Fu? Oh well, you see, they don't have a name yet, so we just call them by their quirk's name. Symbiote, Nami explained. They were born about a month ago. Their quirk makes them this black gooey thing. Kind of like Sansan, but if she was made of that black crap that Yami vomits. So that's why they're in that container. Izuku thought. I hope they haven't been in there for too long. When he latches onto a living thing, goes inside them via their pores or something and starts what we call a bond. Nami continued. When it bonds to someone, they become incredibly strong. Like we're talking about some apex predator type SH stuff. They become strong and fast as well. They can use his black gooey body to make weapons and tendrils and all sorts of crap. They just turn into crazy strong dudes. Like if anyone made a bond with him, boom, instant top 10 hero. Nami looked at Fu. Come on, take the bait, kid. So what's the downside? Izuku knew there had to be one. There always was when dealing with OPC's quirks. Well, you see, the catch is that it eats your organs and makes your emotions go way out of control. Nami explained. His mother was his first host. She had a really weird pregnancy, let's just say. She didn't get a baby bump or anything, and after 9 months she didn't give birth. She just started acting weird. She got really aggressive, and eventually we found out about the kid when she used him to go on a rampage. When she was eventually defeated, we found that most of her internal organs had been damaged, eaten by the kid. She passed a few days later. Oh, I see now. Izuku finally realized why they wanted Fu here. You want Fu to be the new host? Bingo. Nami said, giving him a thumbs up. You see, without a host, the kid will die in about a week. And we can't just keep giving him animals because the animal rights people might actually kill us if we do, and we would have to contain super-powered animals all the time. But Fu, he's perfect. 1, he regenerates so the kid can't kill him so long as he keeps eating. 2, he can't feel pain. And 3, the nerds over at research say that the kid won't be able to affect his brain, given that a lot of his emotional centers are, dead. Fu finished. Yeah, he does sound like a perfect host. Getting all the upsides without any of the downsides. Izuku said, his voice carrying a bit of suspicion. And you're sure nothing bad will happen to Fu? No negative effects? Nope. Nami said. Nothing but positives. Besides, it's not like you have a choice. You have to take the kid under contract. So even if we put this off, eventually you'd have to take him and give him a host. And there is no one better than Fu. Izuku frowned. It was true. Even if he wanted to refuse, which he didn't really, he still wanted to help the kid, he couldn't. And no one other than Fu could act as a host to the new kid without dying or being in constant pain. I'll do it, Fu spoke up, volunteering himself. It's not really a hard decision. I get all the power and it gets to live. What's wrong here? Oh, well, if you're really sure about this, I guess. Izuku said. Then there's no problem. Great. Nami said. Duck. Then she promptly twisted the handle of the container and opened the lid. Huh? Izuku was lucky to be hyped up on coffee, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to duck in time as the child lunged out of the container over Izuku's head before landing on Fu. Fu didn't even flinch as the black goo covered his face before disappearing into his body. Huh, that feels different. You're okay? Izuku asked. He knew that Fu should be fine, but he was still worried because, well, when was he not? Yeah. I can feel it. Fu said. I can hear him. He's relieved. He's getting confused by my regeneration. He's happy about it, I think. Well, I'll let you two get used to your new lifelong bond. Nami said, standing up and going for the door. Oh yeah, by the way, the kid has a weakness to really loud sounds and heat. So be careful. Wait, what? Izuku shouted after her as she opened the door to leave. You see more in the details by. Nami said as she quickly shut the door. Izuku looked stunned for a moment before shaking his head. You gave me the kid who's weak to fire. At the same time as a kid with a fire quirk. He hated DOC sometimes. Okay, hate was a strong word. But he did lament their lack of competence. Hey, Dad? Izuku felt a tug on his shoulder. He looked and found a slick black tendril laying on his shoulder, coming from Fu. We want to go test our new power, Fu said. And tell Kiba about it too. Izuku smiled at him. Of course, I think she's in the training room right now. Great, Fu said, heading towards the door before stopping in his tracks. Hey, what's his name? Oh, Izuku berated himself for forgetting something like that. How about Kyosei? He likes it. Fu said. It's weird to feel feelings again. Even if they're not mine, I missed it. And with that, the boy left. Izuka sat back in his chair. Okay, back to the paperwork. Is he going to be okay? Came an unknown voice from the side of his desk. Izuku jolted up and looked for the source of this voice. Peeking his head out from the side of the desk was Mu. Now that he was awake, he could actually see his eyes. Much like Yami, the whites of his eyes were black, however, his pupils were white. He must have been in his dimension and came up here. Izuku thought. He'll be fine. More than fine, I think. Oh. Okay. The boy said. He hid his head back behind the desk. Izuku waited a moment before looking behind the desk and finding that the boy had vanished. If you're still here, you don't have to be afraid of anything. Izuku said to a seemingly empty room. Please don't hurt yourself, you don't need to hide. There was no response. After a few moments, Izuku sat back down and drank some more coffee. I really hope I wasn't talking to an empty room. Meanwhile, outside his office, Fu gently closed the door behind him, and as he turned around, he noticed Yanda standing outside Izuku's office, trying to look nonchalant and unsuspicious. Who are you? Fu asked. She's probably one of the new kids. I am. Yanda said in his mind, surprising him momentarily. Not that it showed on his face. My name is Yanda. And you are? Fu. Fu introduced himself. I can't hear you. Yanda explained. I can only hear thoughts. Oh. You can't turn that off, can you? Fu suspected he was about to take out his notebook to write down some notes about this when a black tendril came out and gave it to him. Thanks. No. Yanda shook her head. So are you one of my new brothers? Yup. I'm Fu. And Kyosei's here too. Fu thought. Is he the thing that's making weird noises inside you? Yanda squinted at him. She could hear Kyosei, but as he didn't know any words, it was all a bunch of nonsensical noises. Probably. Fu thought. So, you were listening to what Dad was talking about? Pretty sure you were not supposed to do that. I was just making sure he was okay. Yanda thought defensively. That woman wasn't trustable and she was carrying something that kept growling angrily in that container. That's fair. Fu thought. Fu felt Kyosei urge him. He wanted to be active. Well, I'm going to the training room. Fu started walking away. Do you want to come? No thanks. I want to spend some more time with father. She lied slightly. Fu shrugged and walked away. Once he left, Yanda turned back to the door. She liked what she was hearing from her new father. He was much nicer than practically everyone else she had met at this point. He couldn't hide things from her, almost no one could, but he also didn't really try to deceive her. And he cared about her and all the other kids. Which is all she really wanted anyway. Yes, he would do nicely. This place seemed to be the place she had been looking for. A perfect home. And she would do everything in her power to make sure it stayed like that. Finally. Hello? Fu said into the camera. Can you hear us? A new stream. Yes. We can hear you, oh blank-faced one. Where Kiba? Okay, it looks like it's working, Fu said. Finally. Kiba said, standing behind him. The two were standing in the training room with the camera set up in the middle so it could view the whole room. Hello my loyal servants, welcome back to my home. Kiba said. Recently we got a new, what's the word, batch? We got a new batch of siblings. Batch of siblings? So their dad is adopting them. Is he buying them in bulk or something? What the heck is going on? Do you think we should explain the whole thing about Dad? Fu asked. No, my subjects are clever. I'm certain they can figure it out. Kiba waved her hand, dismissing the matter. Anyhow, while we will introduce you to most of our new siblings, I have yet to meet Mu as of yet. No one has seen Mu yet. He could be anywhere and no one would know. Fu commented. Ghost boy? Phantom child? Spooky boy? Yes, but also no, Fu said. Nothing is simple in this house. Yup. Kiba confirmed with a grin. Now brother, show them our new baby brother. Ah, babies, I love babies. Cute baby boy. Why'd I have a feeling this is not going to be a cute little baby? Then, from Fu's chest came a black, slimy mass that formed in the shape of a ball about the size of one of the kids' heads. Then two white slits formed around the top of the ball and then it split open, revealing jagged, sharp white teeth. It looked as if one of Yami's half-formed Grim was coming out of Fu's chest. What the fuck? Ahoy! Yeah, that's about what I expected. Why is everything in this house so terrifying? Queen Crimson, what are you talking about? It's adorable. Hey, don't call my cute baby brother terrifying. Kiba pouted, hugging the slime. He is actually very adorable. Hisses. Kyosei let out a demonic hiss in response. Oh, she's one of those kinds of girls. You mean the awesome kind? Why is it on Fu? I'm so glad you asked. You see, Kyosei's quirk is called symbiote. Kiba mispronounced. Symbiote. Fu corrected. And it lets him bond to a host, making them stronger, tougher, faster, and all sorts of exciting things. Kiba was practically bouncing on her heels as she said this. And the only cost is that it eats your organs and makes you go insane by increasing your emotional, sensitivity. Fu filled in the blank. Sensitivity. Kiba finished. Yeah, only. Such small, insignificant drawbacks. So Fu is perfect. He regenerates and his emotions don't work anyway. I still feel emotions. Just not as much. Fu corrected. Ah. Enough explaining. My subjects did not come to hear me explain what Kyosei does, they want to see what he does. Kiba said, getting impatient. So let's just do this already. Fu rolled his eyes, but he could feel that Kyosei wanted to do the same. Not that he was eager to hurt Kiba, in fact, the sludge boy was quite fond of her, whether that be from Fu's own fondness of Kiba or because of Kiba's fondness of him or a combination of the two. No, one thing Fu learned about Kyosei is that he liked to be active, much like Sanson. He wasn't sure if that was an inherent thing about people with quirks like theirs. He'd have to talk to Izuku about it. He very much enjoyed the prospect of battling Kiba because it meant lots and lots of activity. Kiba moved to one end of the room, eager and ready. Fu moved to the other end of the room. Kyosei started to spread around him, completely encompassing him until he was completely encompassed in black. Kyosei's eyes appeared on his head and his sharp-toothed jaw appeared over his mouth. He really does look like a grim badass. All Might Fan 2033, please don't curse on my daughter's stream. Oh shit, daddy's here. What did he just say? Sorry, sir. You should change your username, it's really generic. All Might Fan 2033, I know. So does Fu fight using Kyosei like a suit, or does Kyosei fight using Fu as a meat puppet? All Might Fan 2033, according to my files, both. Wow, nothing really is simple in this house. Files? Not wasting any more time, Kiba charged towards Fu, not quite at full speed but still at speeds way faster than your average person or vehicle for that matter. Normally, Fu would never be able to react to this and Kiba's fist would fly through his head and shatter it like someone shooting a cannon at a pumpkin. However, the power Kyosei offered made things different. It's like everything slowed down and he could react so much faster. So when Kiba got close, he was able to grab her out of the air and throw her at a wall. Kiba grinned. Finally, Fu could give her a proper fight. So she didn't need to hold back. Fu's black fist enlarged to twice the size of his head and then launched it at Kiba, extending his arm similarly to Sanson. Kiba easily dodged the attack and ran at him once more, this time at full speed. Splush! Fu couldn't react this time, and Kiba punched through his torso, causing black goo, blood, and guts to fly everywhere. You know, out of context this would be horrifying. This is horrifying in any context. You know, for a stream run by a child who's not even 10 years old, it is not family-friendly here. Queen Crimson, I love it here. The zombie boy looked down at the giant hole in his side, black goop filled the wound, and he felt himself regenerate. Much faster than he normally did. Does Kyosei make my regeneration faster too? Fu wondered. Pay attention. Was all Fu heard before his head was blasted open like a watermelon. In seconds his head was back to normal, only to see Kiba charging toward him again. Kyosei took control and made Fu duck, avoiding Kiba's punch. Then a fist came out of his chest and punched Kiba in the face. Which barely did anything. That hurt a little. Kiba smiled, pushing away the fist. And then she grabbed on both of Fu's arms and ripped him in half. All Might Fan 2033, Fu can't win this fight. Huh? Daddy shows who his favorite is. All Might Fan 2033, what no? I just mean that Fu literally cannot win this fight. Kiba can't do any permanent damage to him because of his regeneration. Fu brought his two halves together and punched Kiba right in the face. But his regeneration doesn't last forever and eventually he'll need to intake more meat. But he can barely do any damage to Kiba. The punch landed, but Kiba stood her ground, the blow only making her head bob back a bit. And she is too fast and strong for him to keep landing hits. Fu threw out another punch, but Kiba caught that one and grabbed his other fist before kicking him in the chest and sending him flying into the farthest wall. without his arms. His only real advantage is a possible range advantage. As Kiba ran towards Fu, from his arm stumps came a barrage of slick black tentacles that extended out and grabbed Kiba, attempting to restrain her. But he's too inexperienced to use it properly against someone this strong. Kiba easily broke free of the tentacles and started punching her way through the rest of them. Sure, Kiba's strength is also limited. But when fighting Fu, Kiba charged through the tentacles and came at Fu with her teeth bared, and when she got into range she took a huge bite into Fu's neck, drinking from his blood so roughly that she nearly took his head off. He is an endless supply of blood. And so the battle went on as Izuku predicted. Fu kept trying to hurt Kiba, but the vampire girl simply ripped and tore him and Kyosei apart. Anytime Kiba felt her strength waning, she would simply tear off his head and drink from his skull. It was an almost literal bloodbath. But all the while, Kiba was having fun. Because she was actually trying. Fu kept trying new tricks, turning Kyosei into spikes, hammers, huge hands, throwing her around. Eventually, he tried moving around on the walls to try and evade her. Sure had harder fights, but the fact that fighting Fu was exciting for once put a smile on her face. At long last, he was more than a punching bag. An hour and 47 minutes later. Blood and gore had covered the walls, floor, and ceiling of the training room. Most of the metal had been covered in red, and organs and guts, sometimes in pieces and sometimes just not. Queen Crimson, it's paradise. Heaven. This is why I love Kiba. Ahi. Oh come on, if you were not used to a cartoonish amount of blood and violence, then why are you even here? All Might Fan 2033. On one hand, I'm grateful that Fu's here so the kids have someone to train against that they can't murder. On the other hand, I dislike just how used to gore and violence they've gotten. Kiba was panting with exhaustion, a huge grin still on her face. Fu, meanwhile, while unable to feel exhaustion and physically fine, knew he was beat. He could feel his meat reserves bottoming out. If he didn't get any more meat inside of him soon, then he would go into a frenzy. It was time to call it quits. We're done. Fu surrendered, urging Kyosei to travel back into his body. We give up. The brain, well, it seems Mr. Midoriya's analysis was correct. Queen Crimson, it's over already. Ah. Already? That went on for almost 2 hours. Not like anyone is complaining. All Might Fan 2033. It's not like Fu would be incapable of winning a fight against Kiba. He just doesn't know how to use Kyosei to his fullest yet. If he could, he might find a way to do more damage or hold her off better. The brain, very adept Mr. Midoriya. One day I'm sure he'll be a fine hero. As will Ms. Kiba. All Might Fan 2033. Thank you, Principal Nizu. Holy shit, Nizu's here. The brain, I recall he asked for no cursing. Sorry, sirs. We apologize to our future mouse/bear overlord. The brain, you are forgiven, for now. Kiba ran up to her brothers and wrapped them in a hug. That was great, Fu. You too, Kyosei. Truly worthy of being called my siblings. Please don't squeeze too hard. I need to eat more. Fu reminded her. All Might Fan 2033. Don't worry. I already started making an entire feast when this battle started. Brainworm, but don't you have work to do, Daddy? Another kid? All Might Fan 2033. Don't worry, Kyoku, I'll be fine. I just have to do it after. You all come first. Always. Pogdad. Good parenting. Not something you see a lot from rich parents. Gotta put the babies first. Parent Haplipete. I could have helped. All Might Fan 2033. You would have left your room? Pirate Haplipete. Can I have a stove in my room? All Might Fan 2033. No? Well, let us hurry. Caretaker has prepared a feast for us. Kiba said after checking her chat. All Might Fan 2033. Yup. And then after you eat, you can clean up the training room. Fu and Kiba looked up at the filthy training room, and blood still dripped from the walls and pieces of flesh, bones, and organs dropping from the ceiling and landing in the shallow pools of blood on the floor with a loud, wet plop. The sounds of Kiba's anguish rang throughout the Midoriya house the entire evening. A matter of pride. Thank you for coming in. Izuku thanked Recovery Girl as the elderly hero did her work on Kiba and Netsu in their medbay. You're welcome, dear. With quirks like these, it's no surprise they'd end up hurting each other like this eventually. Recovery Girl said. Yeah, I figured this would happen eventually. Izuku sighed as he remembered how this happened. Hours ago in the training room. Haha. Yeah. Netsu laughed as he unleashed his fiery wrath upon some specially ordered tungsten targets. Fireball after fireball hitting various parts of the targets and some missing them and hitting the wall behind it, still not melting it. It felt nice to have targets he couldn't destroy in one blast. This room was awesome. It was so much bigger than his small room back at the DOC complex, so he could train without worrying about burning up all the oxygen. He could train without restraint. Speaking of no restraint, it was time he took it up a level. Super Heatwave Burning Blast. Netza shouted out his special attack name. Whoosh! A big burst of flames shot out of Netza's arm and fully encompassed half of the room. When the flames died down, he was happy to see that the room and everything in it were fine, despite his intense flames. Well, you didn't disappoint. Netza looked at the doorway, the source of the voice, and found Kiba standing there with a big grin on her face. Allow me to introduce myself. I am the great Kiba Midoriya, Queen of Eternal Darkness. Kiba introduced herself. Oh, you're one of my new sisters. Netza said excitedly. Nice to meet ya. Name's Netsu, and I'm gonna be the #1 hero in the future. Kiba scoffed. Apologies, brother, but that title will go to me. Nah, I'm gonna be the strongest in the world because my quirk is amazing. Netsu argued. My quirk is obviously better. Kiba disagreed. Well, then why don't we see who's stronger? Netza punched his palm. With a fight. Kiba gave a vicious grin. What a wonderful idea. In 5 seconds I am going to punch you into the ceiling. Let's see if you can do that before my flamezo. Netza wasn't able to continue his sentence as Kiba did what she said and gently uppercut him into the ceiling. And that was only the start of the fight. A minute later Kei walked in. Hey, guys, Aro. What she walked in on was Kiba literally bouncing off the walls, trying her hardest to dodge Netsu's all-encompassing fire blast and failing for the most part. Fortunately for her, she had quite the heat resistance. Note, despite having significant heat resistance. That didn't mean she didn't feel hot. As such, this was terribly painful. What's going on in here? Fu came up to the door and immediately backed away once he saw the large amount of fire being shot out. He could hear Kyosei crying out in fear, urging him to run away from the fire. It's okay. I won't let it near us. Fu reassured it. After calming it down, Fu turned back to the fight. Wow, they're really strong. Kei stared in awe at the two's intense fighting. Honestly, it's more impressive that they haven't killed each other. Fu scowled. While an impressive spectacle, it was easy to see that this had gotten out of hand. All of Kiba's clothes were burned off. Fortunately, she was not wearing her cloak and had large burns all over her body and some burned hair. Netsu, on the other hand, was also hurting. They couldn't actually see any wounds on his body, but they could practically feel the pain with every blow Kiba landed on him. As Fu stated, it really was a miracle that neither of them had killed the other. So should we stop this? Kei asked. Hey! Kiba shrieked as she got caught in a really powerful fire blast. Yeah, we really should, Fu said. Like, now? Gah! Netza shouted as he was punched in the gut hard. If one looked close enough, they could see bits of blood fly out of his mouth before evaporating. The kids could feel the heat rising in the room as the fight got more and more intense. Fu had to back away further and further from the door. Hey! Stop! You're fighting too hard. Kei shouted. No. They both shouted stubbornly. Kei turned to Fu. Should we get Dad? Fu shook his head and faced Kei towards the room. No, that will take too long. They might hurt each other more. Let's do this. Hey! Dad's here? Huh? Both kids looked at the doorway only to see Kei with her visor lifted up. Back to the present. Do you two have any idea how worried I was? If it wasn't for your brother and sister turning you to stone, then you two might have killed each other. Izuka shouted at the two children whose head hung low with shame. But it didn't hurt that Kiba was interrupted by a coughing fit, joined by Netsu, who also went into a coughing fit. Do you know why you're coughing? Izuka said. Because you breathed in so much smoke during that fight that it's affecting your lungs. You're lucky that Fu and Kei stopped you when you did, or you two could have gotten serious lung damage or died from the smoke inhalation. Or you could have just died from beating each other up. With these injuries, if you hadn't been stopped and turned to stone when you were, then there definitely would have been some permanent injuries. Recovery Girl warned them. And if your injuries had gotten worse, then it's possible you would have damaged your bodies to the point where you couldn't be heroes anymore. Both children looked horrified. However, after a few moments Kiba spoke. But what about Eri? She could fix us. Or she could wipe you from existence. Izuka glared at both the children harshly. or turn you into babies, or monkeys, or take your quirks away. Eri is just learning how to turn her quirk on and off. No one knows how long it could take for Eri to safely control her quirk and use it on a living person. Kiba became dejected and both children were now thoroughly ashamed of themselves. Izuku took a moment to collect himself, calming himself down before he continued. Kiba, Netsu is not like all the other kids you spar with. Fu, Sanson, and Kai can take your punches, he can't. And fire is very dangerous. Not just because it can burn you, but it can suffocate you and the smoke can cause lung damage and death. Neither of you can just fight each other at full power without doing serious harm to each other. Sorry, Dad. Netsu apologized. Sorry, Daddy. Kiba dropped her typical act. There was a long pause as everyone waited for Izuku to speak. But, Kiba, I do have to give you some credit for holding back enough not to kill or seriously damage him. Izuku acknowledged, making the girl feel a little bit better. At least your restraint training is working. Izuku turned to Netsu. I told you that you could train a little bit with some of the special equipment I ordered and marked especially for you. Not that you could overuse you and use it on one of the other kids. Sorry, Dad, Netsu repeated, remembering the specific instructions that were given to him earlier and how he failed to follow them. You could not only have killed someone else but yourself. Using your powers to their fullest while indoors will burn up all the oxygen and suffocate you to death. Izuku reminded him. Or the smoke will kill you. You've been told this before. I got excited. The training room was big and it didn't melt, I wasn't thinking. Netsu once again apologized. Izuku sighed, drinking some calming tea to ease his nerves. Okay, all right. Before you can train with most of the others, you need to go through some extensive quirk training. And Kiba, before you can train with Netsu, the both of you need to wait until you have better control over your quirks. For now, Kiba stick with training with Sanson, Fu, Kai, and maybe some of the Grim if Yami can make some spares. And Netsu, stick with training with Kai and maybe some Grim. He can't train with Sanson? Kiba asked curiously. She understood why he couldn't train with Fu now that he had a new aversion to fire, but Sanson was made of water, or rather good, but it was watery, so it shouldn't be a problem. When liquids like what Sanson is made of are heated up too much, they do what's called evaporating and turn into gas and mist and things, Izuku explained with the patience he had left. Now I'm not sure if that would kill her, but I don't want to take chances. So stick to training with Kai. Not at full power, his scales are only so fire resistant. Yes, Dad? Netsu nodded. And both of you are grounded for a week and a half, Izuku told them sternly. And no exercising during that time either. You two are going to rest your bodies until about 2 weeks, Recovery Girl said. Until 2 weeks have passed. Izuku finished. Izuku looked down at his saddened and demoralized children and felt a pang of guilt. He knew he needed to do it, but he didn't like it. He carefully hugged both the children, making sure that he A. didn't hug too hard and B. that he hugged the parts of Netsu covered by his fireproof clothing. It was still hot, but it didn't burn him. You both have such powerful quirks. Gifts. But with that power comes responsibility. You have to learn to use less of it, otherwise you'll end up killing someone one day. Izuku told them. I understand that it's hard. It might feel like you're living in a world made of cardboard sometimes. Always careful not to break something. Break someone. But it's what needs to be done so that way one day you can be the heroes you want to be. The heroes I know you can be. Neither of the children hugged back. Not because they didn't want to, but because Kiba's skin was sensitive right now and because Netsu was still on fire. But they both nudged themselves into Izuku's embrace. Is this what a hug feels like? Netsu wondered. It's nice. The hug lasted a bit longer before the moment was ruined when the door was literally thrown off its hinges and Shiroku entered. And she was not happy. You burned my dress. The spider girl yelled in outrage. Izuku sighed. It never ends, does it? Where do Sansons come from? Izuku put down his phone and wiped the sweat from his brow. All right, so that's the food for this month taken care of. Now to order Shiroku's materials. Knock knock knock. Was the sound of someone banging on his office door. Dad, can we come in? Asked the energetic voice of Netsu. Okay, Izuku said, then taking a drink of water while also downing his anti-headache medication. The door opened and in walked Netsu and Fu came walking in. Hey, Dad. How does Sanson have babies? Netsu asked immediately. Izuku spat out his drink. What? Netsu was about to repeat it, but Fu shoved one of his hands, which he had already torn off, into his mouth to shut him up. We were showing Netsu our notebook and all the cool quirks around. And then we started talking about Sansan. Fu explained. And we were wondering how Sansan gets pregnant. With new context, Izuku now properly understood the question at hand. It was an understandable one, too. Izuku himself had wondered the exact same thing until eventually he got the reports on how it worked. Fortunately, Izuku had already explained the birds and the bees to pretty much all the children during their lessons. Now one might say it's too soon to do such a thing. But Izuku had his reasons. One reason mainly. Because of animal quirks. You see, when a person got an animal quirk, it often came with animalistic habits. Sometimes including some form of heat, often occurring before that person reaches the proper age. This has led to many issues in both the past and present, and for a while was the reason for many negative perceptions of people with animal quirks in the past that would eventually turn into the creature rejection clan and other discriminatory groups. Izuku had absolutely no doubt that in his line of work and with his luck, he would have to deal with at least one kid going into heat, and as such it was better that he inform the other children of what these things were and how to properly react to them, rather than having an animal child in heat jump them and convince them to do a thing they shouldn't be doing because they don't know any better. Plus, with the internet and Kyoku, who was already aware of such things, around, it was probably a fruitless endeavor to hide such things from them anyway. Okay, so Sansan actually can't get pregnant. Izuku started to explain. What happens is, when she gets older, at some point her acid will temporarily become non-corrosive. What does that mean? Netsu asked. It means it won't burn through anything, Izuku explained. So it's like when we give her the chemical? Fu asked. Exactly, the chemical actually forces her body into that state early. Izuku continued. But when that happens, she'll be able to slide herself into a woman's passage and leave a part of her body inside there to fertilize the eggs and have a baby. Both kids took in that information and thought about what that implied. Wait, Netsu thought. Does that mean Sansan is made of dash? Fu shoved another hand inside his mouth to shut him up. Does that mean that Sansan is technically a boy? Fu asked. Izuku held in a breath. How to explain this? Because technically speaking he wasn't wrong, while technically neither gender, she was closer, biologically speaking, to a male than a female, if only because of the way she reproduced. But Sansan is Sansan, Izuku told him, giving him a pat on the head. She can be whatever she wants to be. If she says she's a girl, then she's a girl. Fu thought about that for a moment before shrugging. I guess you're right. But you didn't answer my question, Netsu spoke after turning the hand to Ash. Is she made of dash? Hey, Netsu, can you go give Kai a fire bath? Fu, why don't you go watch him? Izuku said, quickly changing the topic. Okay, let's go, Fu said, also not wanting Netsu to finish his sentence. Using more ripped-off hands so he didn't have to touch him directly, he pushed Netsu out of the room and shut the door. Izuku gave a sigh of relief and got up to clean the water and blood from Fu ripping off his hands that was now on his floor. One thing Izuku had always found fascinating and embarrassing: how quirks affected the reproductive abilities of a person. Because while many things about quirks are unknown, one thing that has been consistent about them is that they did not make reproduction impossible. They could make it difficult or complicated or just straight up weird, but never impossible. Even the people who seemingly could never have children because of their quirks still could in the right conditions or with the right partner. Nature finds a way. Don't do drugs. It was late at night, meaning that most of the kids were now asleep. Except for, of course, the ones who typically stayed active during the night. Two such kids were Fu and Kyosei. Fu could feel Kyosei urge him to eat. After the good child had figured out how his regeneration worked, he had been insistent that they consume things on a consonant bias, so it could maintain its infinite food source. We're going to eat, don't worry. Fu reassured his body mate. As they walked towards the kitchen, they heard someone rustling around and saw that the lights were on. Looks like Fukinoko is in the kitchen again, Fu said. While many of the children haven't actually seen Fukinoko on account of her almost never leaving her room. But Fu had been one of the few that was not Eri and Kei to have seen her quite a few times. Fukinoko liked to visit the kitchen at night, and seeing Fu also frequented the kitchen at basically any time. He had seen glimpses of the girl on multiple occasions. Of course, he had never actually talked to her or even approached her. He had heard she was easily spooked, and an undead boy didn't seem like a good person to bring her out of her shell. However, now they were hungry. And Kyosei wouldn't let that stand. Guess I'll just try not to freak her out, Fu said. As he walked into the kitchen as quietly as he could, he saw Fuku taking something out of the oven. Cookies. Chocolate chip. He waited for a moment for her to put the tray down so she didn't drop it in case he scared her. Hello, Fu said, trying not to seem intimidating. Hey. Fuku jumped back. Fortunately, she had already put down the tray. Please don't hurt me. I won't. Fu tried to reassure her. I'm another kid that lives here. My name is Fu. Fu? Fuku repeated fearfully. What do you want? I came here to eat. Fu was interrupted. Me. You came to eat me. Fuku kept backing away but hit a wall. And with Fu in front of the entrance, it seems like she had no hope of running away. Please. Don't hurt me. Poof. Fuku's eyes went wide as she accidentally unleashed her quirk. Fear gas filling the room. No. Don't breathe it in. Please. Too late, Fu said, seemingly unaffected by the gas. Your quirk probably doesn't work on me. That happens sometimes. Fuku looked at him with disbelief. What? Fu took out his notebook. Your quirk is fear gas. I don't feel fear, so that's probably why it doesn't work. And my quirk doesn't work on you? Fuku's expression turned from disbelief to amazement. And my quirk doesn't work on you? Yeah. Sorry. Fu said. Not sorry. This is amazing. There's someone who my stupid quirk doesn't work on. Fuku cheered as the gas started to dissipate. Oh, do you not like your quirk either? Fu asked her. No. It's terrible and only makes bad things happen. Fuku went back to seeming like she was going to cry for a second. But if it doesn't work on you, then that means that Fuku started shuffling her feet and got really sheepish as nervous sweat dripped down her face. He waited for a while as Fuku tried to work up the nerve to ask a question. SSS so mama maybe we CCC could be FR friends. Fuku looked like she was about to have a panic attack with each word she said. She quickly picked up a cookie and offered it to him. Why, you can have these cookies I baked. No, stupid Fuku. Why would he want you stupid cookies? They probably taste terrible and will make him hate you and dash. It's okay, I'll take it. Fu took the cookie to try and calm her down. Of course, he wouldn't be able to taste it, but if it would make her feel better, then why not? He took a bite. And then his world changed. Little did Fu know that the chemicals inside of chocolate were very, very good for Kyosei. And so when he took a bite and chemicals traveled down to the goop child, Kyosei would reward Fu by making him experience pleasurable sensations. In normal cases, this would just result in any chocolate tasting like it was the food of the gods, but since Fu couldn't taste anything, this just caused an unnatural amount of dopamine to flood his brain. This would cause formerly dead parts of his brain to jolt back to life temporarily like they were struck by lightning. In short, chocolate equals a drug-like reaction in Fu. Suddenly the boy's face became more expensive than it had been in years as his eyes went and became absolutely starstruck. For a few seconds he was frozen, and when he moved again he was no longer himself. Fu absolutely devoured his cookie, shoving it into his mouth whole, chewing it with reckless abandon. Once he was done with that, he started moving his head around wildly. More. EAP. Fuku backed up into the wall in fear as Fu's eyes turned completely dark, becoming nothing more than an animal. A chocolate-hunting animal. His eyes landed on the cookies and he leapt towards them. Fuku could only watch in horror as Fu slowly turned into a slick black monster. Bits of cookie went flying everywhere, only to get grabbed by tentacles and shoved into now spiky Fu's maw. By the time he was done, there was not even a crumb left. Out of chocolate, Fu looked around frantically for more, not finding anything until his eyes landed on the terrified Fukanoko. He lunged at her, grabbing her by her collar into the air. Where is it? Tell me. WHE-. Fortunately for Fuku, the rush he got from eating chocolate without any more to sustain the high wear off fairly quickly. This caused his brain to completely shut off, killing him temporarily before his quirk activated and revived him, but still left him and Kyosei completely unconscious. Kyosei was absorbed back into his body and he fell over. Fuku stared at him in shock for a few moments before also falling over unconscious. Fortunately, Izuku had been watching this on the cameras the whole time, and Fu was promptly banned from eating chocolate, and Fu spent the entire next week apologizing to Fuku. Feeding requirements. It was early in the morning. By this time, almost everyone was asleep with the exception of the two children who didn't require sleep. It was also the time in which Izuku woke up after a refreshing 3 hours of sleep and went down to the kitchen to start cooking for everyone. And when he got there, to his surprise, Yanda and a very groggy Yami with his Beowulf were there waiting for him. Yanda? Yami, did you stay awake all of last night? Please tell me you didn't. Izuku asked her. No, father. We woke up early. Yanda explained. Izuku raised an eyebrow at the prospect of Yami sleeping for less than 10 hours. Yami woke up early? She talks loud in my head, Yami said, thoroughly annoyed. And it goes through walls. You wanted to learn how to cook, right? Yanda put her hands on her hips and huffed, clearly not getting what's so irritated about. And you want to help father, so stop complaining. Yami gave a low growl but didn't object any further. In all honesty, when Yanda kept pestering him to get up, if he really wanted to, he could have just sent his Beowulf to chase her away. But he agreed with her that learning to cook would help take some of the burdens off Izuku. That, and also he could make his own food, so win-win. So you two want to learn how to cook? Izuku thought about it for a moment. On the one hand, he didn't want to burden them, but on the other, cooking was a useful skill that they would need to know if he wasn't around. Alright, since I have to make everyone's breakfast, I guess you two can watch and see how it's done. The two nodded and watched Izuku eagerly. Okay, so first is Fu and Kyosei. He's pretty much always awake and requires a lot of food, but it's pretty simple. Izuku explained. He opened up the refrigerator room and went inside, the two kids hesitantly following him inside and enduring the cold. You see this pile of meat, Izuku said, pointing to a pile of meat that was a bit taller than he was. This is Fu's meal for the day. He only actually needs to eat a few times every now and then unless he's been using his regeneration a lot. Kyosei slowly eats at Fu, so Fu's food is his food. He eats that much. Yanda said, looking at the pile with wide eyes. It was over 3 times her size. Yeah, he's been training a lot more, so he's had to regenerate more, and so he's had to eat more. Izuku explained. Yami, can you ask the Beowulf to bring that cart here? Izuku pointed to a large cart and Yami nodded, willing his Beowulf to push the cart in front of the pile of meat. Alright, now all we have to do is load up the cart with about a third of the pile, Izuku explained. And so Izuku filled up the cart, and after a couple minutes the cart was full and he was done. Okay, now we just have to get this onto the table, Izuku said. Don't we have to cook it first? Yanda asked in confusion. No, Fu can't get sick and he can't taste anything either, so it's no different if you give him raw or cooked food, Izuku explained. So cooking all this food would just be a massive waste of time. Yami nodded to show he understood before ordering his Beowulf to push the cart. At the tables, a few minutes later, the 4 of them, counting the Beowulf, had finished laying out Fu's breakfast, which took up half of one of the extraordinarily long tables. Where does all this go? There's more meat on this table than on his body? Yanda wondered. Well, it's complicated. Basically, his body shrinks down the meat and puts it in a special organ that his body uses when he wants to regenerate, Izuku explained as simply as he could. It's like the meat is fuel going into a car, that organ in the fuel tank, and his regeneration is the car. Are we done? Yami asked, wanting to move on. Ah, yes. The next person is Kai. Izuku explained. A few minutes later, a nearby storage house. The storage house was a medium-sized building not too far away from the main building that looked like your average warehouse. Izuku had used it to store the enormous amount of food they had. The children were told what was in here but were prohibited from entering on account that they might get hurt and or destroy the building. Seeing as it was only Yanda and Yami, he would make an exception. The children looked around the building and saw that it was filled with stacks and stacks of crates. Most of them refrigerated. However, what drew their attention the most were some of the giant crates. These crates were roughly 20 times bigger than the rest of the crates and took up a lot of space in the warehouse. Izuku walked up to one of these giant crates and put his hand on it. This is 1 meal's worth of food for Kai. It's full of fish, and all we have to do is get the fish from here to the outside of his room. And how do we do that? Yanda asked, seriously stumped on how Izuku had been doing this all this time. Izuku walked over to a nearby wall and pushed a button. Then light poured into the building as the ceiling opened up. The green-haired teen then pulled out his grim whistle and blew on it. WRRRRR. After a few moments, a swarm of griffin flew in and landed in front of him. Yonda hid behind Izuku's leg, still not used to the sight of these nightmarish creatures. Deliver Kai his food, Izuku ordered them. The Grimm flew up and over the crate before lifting the lid off with their beaks and throwing it to the side. Then they dove into the crate and grabbed onto some ropes. They flew up into the air, revealing that underneath the huge pile of fish was a tarp that combined with the ropes would allow them to lift the fish into the sky, which they promptly did, taking it away to give it to Kai. They already know how to do it, so all you'd need to do is open up the ceiling, call them, tell them what to do, and then close the ceiling back up again, Izuku explained as he pressed the button again, causing the ceiling to close up. It was so hard to train them to do that. Izuku thought, forgetting that Yonda could hear him for a moment. So who's next? Yami asked impatiently. Well, Sansan doesn't really need to eat and Shiruku feeds herself, so we don't really have to worry much about special needs until we start making Netsu's food, Izuku explained. So I guess we can actually start cooking everyone else's food. The two nodded enthusiastically with huge smiles on their faces, eager to get to the actual cooking. No more wait. Let's go, Yami ordered. Sometime later. In the end, they cooked some simple eggs. Izuku didn't want to overwhelm them with something complicated or hard to make after all, and it was one of Kei's favorites as well. And so together they made food for Yonda, Yami, Eri, Kei, Kiba, Kyoku, and Otoko and laid them out on the tables. As none of them required special food. Some of them did have special serving requirements, however. Kiba needed some blood on top of her meal as well as having to be served with a special plate and utensils so she didn't accidentally break them. And Otoko's food needed to be distanced from everyone else as the boy didn't like to be too close to others. Soon enough the children started coming into the cafeteria in search of breakfast and started eating, not letting their appreciation towards Izuku and their two siblings go unnoticed. Kei in particular hugged them all as tightly as she could. Lastly, Mu and Fukunoko needed to have their dishes delivered to their rooms as neither of them were keen to show their faces. Yami delivered the food to Fukunoko, whom he actually got to see for the first time. Izuku had given him a key that would unlock her room, and since she was asleep there wasn't an issue. So much negativity. Yami had always noticed Fuku's negative emotions. It was hard not to given there was so much of it, but up close it made him very concerned. I'll have to ask Dad later. For now, he simply placed the plate on a nearby table so she could eat it later on. Seeing as Fuku often stayed up late at night and woke up later in the evening, Izuku had allowed her to have a microwave in her room to reheat the meals he left for her. Meanwhile, Yonda was told to place the plate in front of Mu's door and then turn around. When she did so, she heard some strange sounds behind her and then a very quiet, "Thank you." And when she turned around, the plate was gone. Once the two were done, they returned to the kitchen where Izuku was preparing to make sausages. The last meal we have to make is for Netsu. He tends to be a pretty heavy sleeper, so I typically make his food last, Izuku explained as he started making the food. Netsu was pretty hard to make food for because he keeps burning it. DC had these special cube things for him to eat that were heat-proof, but they tasted terrible, so I decided to find another way. Turns out all you need to do is make the food either undercooked, cold, or frozen, and it'll finish cooking inside of his mouth. You have to be careful though, because if it's too unprepared, it might not finish cooking when he eats it and he could get sick, so you have to be very careful. Father? Yonda gave him a concerned and slightly exhausted look. This is a lot of work? Do you have to do this every day? Every day, 3 times a day, Izuku said. On top of all my other work, and it's only gonna get harder as time goes on. Wait, she can hear this. It's fine. If anything, it's fun. Yeah. Fun. Yonda's look told Izuku exactly how much she believed that. Well, anyway, I'll stick to taking care of Netsu's meals since it requires a lot of care, so you two can sit down and enjoy your food, Izuku told them. The two kids nodded and were about to leave when they suddenly realized something. What about you? Yonda asked. Izuku gave them a confused look for a moment before his eyes went wide with realization. Oh right? You don't have to worry about my food. I eat the same thing as everyone else, so you don't have to worry about that. If anything, I'll probably just have a piece of toast or something. You two go eat. Yami hesitantly left to go eat his food, but Yonda stayed a bit longer. She wanted to object, but her stomach started rumbling, reminding her of her need to eat. And so she walked out to join the other children, and as she was leaving she heard something concerning. I really need to stop forgetting to eat. A walk between worlds. This place was interesting. It was a lot better than the facility where he had been kept before. He had a room. Well, he had one before, but this time no one was watching him, so he could be in it without having to use his quirk to gain some privacy. And there was a lot more to do inside of it. But outside his room, there were the other children and Izuku. They were much more interesting and friendly than the people in the suits back at the facility. It made his walks so much more worth going on. Unlike Fukinoko, he didn't enjoy staying in his room all day. But since he didn't like interacting with people much, he used his quirk to go on walks through the house. He'd leave through his door and walk the halls without his quirk, and when he heard someone or wanted to go through a wall, he'd go into his dimension. Before, he'd just stay in his dimension for the entire walk, but that only gave him 30 minutes to walk around and get back, so Izuku suggested doing it this way. His first stop was the library. This place was typically one of the quietest in the house. Fu was reading some manga over in the corner. Mu was honestly scared of him more so than most of his other siblings. Not really because of the oozing black slime monster that was inside him, it's because his expressionless face and monotone voice made him impossible to read. This unknown element made the boy quite frightening to someone who was used to studying people. Avoiding him, Mu walked over to the other 3 other people in the room. Kyoku, Eri, and Kei. The 3 of them were huddled together with Kyoku in the middle and Eri and Kei on either side of her, as they all seemed to be reading and talking about the same book. Eri was someone Mu was kind of jealous of. The girl was shy like himself and very scared of most things, like himself, but she was braver than him. Even though she was scared, she still didn't hide, not like he did. He wishes he was more like her. Kei was bursting with energy and was always interesting to watch. And honestly, not all of her puns were terrible, but most of them were. Kyoku was a bit scary. She was always so sure of herself and assertive. The book they were reading was titled, Looking Up to Magical Girls. Well, that seemed like a nice book. Mu walked behind the girls and got a real good look at the book. Oh. Those girls were not wearing a lot of clothes, they were also touching each other a lot. Didn't Izuku say that this was how babies were made? But they were both girls? Could 2 girls make a baby? He'd have to ask Izuku about it later. Isn't this one of those things Izuku said we shouldn't read? Eri asked. Is it? Kei asked. Daddy did say not to read it. Kyoka pouted. I think this is another book those DOC idiots shouldn't have out here. We should tell Daddy. The 2 other girls nodded and they ran off to find Izuku. DC, it was a wonder to Mu how they could be so incompetent at times and yet still manage to catch so many powerful children. Regardless, now that the girls were gone, he should go elsewhere. Next was the cafeteria. Not much here today, just Yami asleep on the table after eating a lot of food. Not much out of the ordinary. Yami was strange to him. By all rights, he should have been terrified of the nightmarish-looking boy who could spawn hellish beasts of darkness, but he had gotten used to the grim rather quickly. After seeing them be used by everyone as assistants, he got over their appearance rather quickly. And Yami himself had an appearance similar to his own, so that didn't scare him all too much. After all, he wasn't really afraid of physical threat, it was more social situations that scared him. If something tried to attack him, he could always just use his quirk and he was basically invincible. If he tried to do that in the middle of a conversation, that would only lead to more issues later. Since he was a bit hungry, he decided he would eat some chips that Izuku had left as a snack for all of them. There were a lot of flavors and he didn't know which one to pick, so he just picked the regular ones. After that there wasn't much to do, however, Yami had woken up and with urgency, he called his Beowulf and left on top of it. Out of curiosity, Mu followed. They eventually made their way to Yami's room, which Yami promptly went inside. Now, it's not like Mu liked going inside people's rooms without them knowing. But his curiosity tended to get the better of him in many situations. This was one of them. Going through objects was always weird. It's not like he just went through things naturally. If that was the case, he would fall through the floor. No, to go through objects he kinda had to push himself through them. It wasn't very hard, but moving through thicker objects often felt like moving through jello for him and could be tiresome after a while. After going through the door, he found that Yami's room was covered in drawings and notes. Taking a closer look, he could see that the drawings were all grim, but not any that he had seen before. One was of an ape with some notes next to it saying, "Has thumbs, can help carry big things." Another one was something that looked like a Beowulf but different. The only thing next to it was the word learning. There were quite a few more, but one drew his attention more than the others. It was a woman. One that looked very similar to Yami with the same white hair, white skin, and black eyes with red pupils. This one gave off an ominous vibe, especially since the words next to her said, "I can feel her." He could hear Yami muttering while drawing and writing in a notebook. Getting a bit creeped out, Mu decided it was time to leave. After exiting Yami's room, Fu decided to go to the training room to see if there would be any entertaining fights to watch. When he got there, he arrived at the end of another fight between Kiba and Sanson. This fight happened quite frequently, and honestly, they were his least favorite to watch. At first, watching Sanson fight was fun, but after a while, the fact that no one could harm her made the battles kind of unexciting. That wouldn't stop Kiba from trying. She was relentless in trying to beat an opponent she literally could not hurt. Kiba was one of his favorite people to watch. For many reasons. 1. She was always over the top and her personality and vocabulary typically made him giggle at least once. 2. When she wasn't fighting Sanson, her fights were pretty entertaining. And 3. She was the only one he could watch from his room thanks to her YouTube channel. That being said, he didn't feel the need to stick around for this fight. What point was reading a book when you knew the ending? Given that he didn't have much more time, he decided to go outside. Thankfully, it didn't take him very long as he just went through all the floors and walls until he got outside. When he reached the backyard, he found Shiruku going for a jog. Mu actually didn't have much of an opinion on Shiruku. The only real thing he knew about her was that she made clothes, which was nice but didn't really mean much to Mu, whose clothes would disintegrate if he used his quirk for more than a minute. Moving on, Mu started walking towards the greenhouse when in the distance he saw Netsu and Kai fighting. Not like it was hard to see as one of them was on fire and the other was enormous. Netsu and Kai were also pretty fun to watch. Kai seems exceptionally nice and polite, and Mu had even almost considered talking to him once. Netsu was, well, not to sound like Kei, a hothead. He was a bit arrogant, but not overly so, and never to the point where it made him not fun to watch. Observing him try and master his quirk was interesting at the very least. Although if he was being honest, he wished he could see him and Kiba fight. They wanted it so bad that it kinda made him want to see it too. Kai and Netsu spared quite a bit, seeing as Kai was the only person Netsu could fight. Although Kai tended to win most of those fights, Netsu did manage to get some victories, so at least it wasn't as predictable as Kiba v Sanson. However, he didn't have enough time in his dimension to watch the fight today, so he just made his way to the greenhouse. Nothing much tended to happen in the greenhouse. As usual, Otoko was there, but not only him but Yanda was there as well. The two were a fair distance away from each other and just standing there. They were probably having a conversation. Otoko was mute, however, his thoughts weren't. Yanda could actually have conversations with him. Something that the large boy was ecstatic about. Unfortunately, Mu couldn't hear a word. Mu's quirk basically put him in another dimension, meaning as far as Yanda's quirk was concerned, he was just empty space with no thoughts to read. And while he was very relieved about this, it also meant he was immune to her telepathy while in his dimension, which made watching her interact with people very confusing. Seeing as the only thing here was a wordless conversation, Mu decided to go back to the house. After all, he had one more stop. Later, in front of Fuku's room, Mu exited his dimension and looked up at the metal door of his one and only friend. He hesitated. The idea of interacting with anyone still scared him, but this was his friend. Knock knock. Ah! Mu heard his friend scream. There was a bit of panicked shuffling before he got a response. Who is it? Mu answered, just loud enough for her to hear. There was a bit of a pause before the door slid open and Mu ran in. Some time ago, Mu discovered Fuku hiding in her room and became fascinated with her. She clearly had many talents and interests, but she locked herself away in her room. At first, he respected the fact you shouldn't enter a girl's room without permission. However, as he started to get more and more glimpse of her, the more curious he got. Watching her happily go about her business and knit or cook or mess around with her plant 1 minute and then completely lose it the next when she came into contact with someone. Eventually, he waited till she re-entered her room and followed her in. He'd been delighted to see she was still just as fun to watch as she talked to herself quite frequently and reacted in fun, over-the-top ways to basically anything. Sad scene in anime, her eyes turned into waterfalls. Here's a joke she finds funny. She got worried she would die with laughter. And then she started writing. Apparently, the girl had an interest in writing stories, and this was the best part of watching her if he was honest. Fuku had a great creative mind which was mostly used to imagine why people would hate her and how they might exact their wrath upon her, but when this imagination was used for something more constructive, it was remarkable. It wasn't just what she was writing, it was how she wrote. She would write things down with such energy and fervor, putting down paragraph after paragraph in only a few minutes while talking aloud excitedly about her story, only to suddenly stop and go back to edit and alter her work, scolding herself all the while. Mu found himself observing her longer than he should have, and he started disappearing. He panicked and left his dimension, revealing himself to Fuku and causing them both to completely freak out. Long story short, Fuku was completely freaked out by Mu and his quirk, and Mu felt very guilty about invading her privacy like this but didn't know how to convey those feelings through conversations due to lack of experience, and in the end, Izuka needed to step in. After scolding Mu for invading Fuku's privacy, they had made an agreement. Fuku didn't feel that her door would be effective in stopping Mu from coming in, so she made a deal with him. If he wanted to see her, then she would let him in, but he had to not be in his dimension. The thought of someone being in her room she couldn't see or hear freaked her out a lot, and while she didn't like the idea of people being in her room, it was less scary than the former idea. And so now, at least twice a week, Mu would go into Fuku's room and they would do what they enjoyed doing together: writing stories. Fuku never left her room, so she never saw what her siblings got up to outside of her room unless she was watching Kiba's videos. Mu saw plenty of things with his quirk and was happy to share them with her to provide inspiration for their writing. They were reading what? Fuku's face turned red. Yeah, and they were doing it in the hands of this big lady, Mu explained. He typically only stayed for an hour, there was only so much social interaction they could take, but it was nice for the both of them. This place was pretty amazing if you asked Mu. After all, nothing here was ever boring. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like, subscribe, share the video, and support the original writer. See you in the next video.